without further ado, I welcome the first speaker of the Affirmative to begin with this. Gorgeous.
The cost of living crisis is plaguing our society. It is essential that we increase the progressivity of the tax system. 3 points for the House today. Firstly, as to how we decrease wealth inequality. Secondly, how the redistribution of tax benefits all those who are taxed. And lastly, Katie is going to split and tell you about how the incentives of companies to create goods that are affordable doesn't change. So, what's our setup? And why do we think we need to significantly increase the progressivity of the tax system? The current tax system allows for a lot of wealth inequality, which leaves the low socioeconomic background people struggling from day to day, but allows for the wealthiest people to get away with not paying tax significant enough to be proportional to their total wealth. So, how are we changing this? It's going to be loosely based off of our current tax system, where we are going to scale up and scale down certain individuals to be required to their needs. We believe that anyone below $33,000 will decrease their taxes by 4%. Between $33,000 and $69,000 is going to remain the same. Between $69,000 to $150,000, their taxes will be increased by 3%. Between $150,000 to $275,000, their taxes will be increased by 7%. And anyone above $250,000 is going to have an increase of tax by 10%. Companies have a similar system, but on a larger scale. Small local businesses who make less than $100,000 of profit will have their tax decreased by 5%. You're going to keep the people who earn under $175,000 the same for their company. And then there's going to be a marginal increase for those earning between $175,000 to $300,000 of profit by 3%. And lastly, between $300,000 to $500,000, their tax will increase by 7%. Anyone between $500,000 to $1 million is going to have a 10% increase. And obviously larger scale corporations who are earning millions and millions of dollars will get taxed above 20% above their current amount. Firstly then, as to why we decrease wealth inequality. First of all, we are lowering the amount of tax of people who have lower socioeconomic backgrounds. This means that they get an increase in disposable income, which means that you have more money for individuals to use for necessities. This is a really big benefit that only we can claim on our side of the house. But it also means that we actually have less need for welfare payments, which supplement people who have those lower incomes because they, in essence, now have more money which they can then spend for themselves. But the second part of this here is that there's less of a burden on low SES individuals to be working multiple jobs to earn a living. Because of this tax decrease, it means that the income that they get from working, say, 2 out of their 3 jobs or 1 out of their 3 jobs now is equivalent to the income that they'd get from all 3 of those jobs, which means that they can spend more time with their family, they can be more present, and they can offer more support to their community and the people that they need to the most. But if you don't buy that material, we actually tell you why we have if you don't buy the material that most low socioeconomic background people work multiple jobs, but rather they receive the benefit, here is why we actually improve that as well. There is now a greater incentive to go and get a job because now the increase between your income from having a job and your income from being on the benefit is large enough to warrant you wanting to change your lifestyle. Having a job is really important because firstly, it means that you fill gaps in our market, which is currently struggling. We have a lack of teachers, we have a lack of nurses, we have a lack of retail workers. All of this is really harmful. But secondly, it also just means that you have less welfare payments that the government is paying, which means that they can allocate resources more into different areas. We're going to explain that next. But it also means that you're giving these people a greater purpose because now they're not reliant on government welfare. They feel like they have more autonomy in their life. This is really impactful because they used to feel like they were a burden onto society. Now they are feeling like they are being a really good part and a beneficial part of it. But this doesn't only impact those people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, it also impacts our local businesses because they also aren't being taxed as much. What this means is you no longer get the rise of corporations who are able to buy out into an entire city because you now have like local companies who are able to keep up with inflation, who are able to like incur the harms of being in a post-COVID era. They are now able to continue to producing goods for their local people. And a lot of people really enjoy to support locally because they are able to see that their money isn't just going to a really rich person already, but it's actually helping someone who needs that money. But it also just means that you're providing for your local economy. But now we're going to move on to the impact just on wealth equality altogether, right? It means that the scale of wealth divide changes, which means that the gap between the richest and the poorest people decreases. And this is really good because it means that you're breaking down those social class divides because there's simply just less of a divide between your upper echelons and your lower echelons of society. But I think the last point here, and I think what Negating's probably biggest pushes will be today, is that people then don't have an incentive to continue to work hard because they know that they're going to get taxed more on the money that they are going to make, and therefore they just don't want to do that, right? The reason that people still have a motivation and incentive to earn more money is because A, they're earning to get more disposable income. Obviously, the more you earn, even if you're being taxed more, it's still proportionally more than what you'd earn if you didn't earn that much in the first place. But secondly, people measure wealth relative and in comparison to other people, so therefore you're still going to have more money than someone else. Thirdly, it's about status and luxury, and being an individual of high income motivates people. But I think the last thing here is that people who are in high earning jobs also do it because their job provides them status, right? Being a lawyer makes you look and sound really clever. Being a doctor or a surgeon, once again, means that you're actually also benefiting to society and you're doing something that you're passionate about. We think that these people who are passionate about their jobs are still going to go into these careers. This material is really important and should be weighed really highly because these actors are the most vulnerable in our society. They are struggling to provide for their family or kids. They are dropping out of school. Kids are dropping out of school at a young age to earn an income to put food on a table. We are able to benefit these people infinitely more than any harm to the wealthier people being taxed more. We will always accept a trade-off between allowing a mother not to work 3 jobs to send her child to school with shoes on their feet rather than having a wealthier person missing out on their third trip to Bali. We are happily willing to make that trade-off. But secondly, as to why we get a better redistribution of tax which benefits all of those who are being impacted by this new tax system. If you have a point, I'll take it.
Earlier you stated that people can work singular jobs, but what is the tax that the people companies receive when they implement that into food products, etc.?
Katie's going to give her split into you as why that's not going to happen, but for a one-line response is because competition exists. You cannot raise your prices that much that you're locking out people because you're not going to make a profit if no one can afford your goods. So when tax revenue increases significantly, and because this is happening because we're taxing the richer people more, it means that the government budget increases. This means that the government can spend more money on the general population. This looks like the government spending on sectors like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Why? Because these are the sectors that impact people the most. The government understands that they need to spend areas on money that is going to impact all people because it justifies the extra tax on those higher, wealthier individuals because they can see that their tax is directly benefiting them. When they are driving on a road without potholes, and it means that they're less likely to get into a crash, that's a benefit. When they are going to a hospital and they're not having to wait hours to get a bed or hours to be triaged because now you have more resources in that hospital, that is a benefit. That is something that they are unable to claim on their side of their house. That is why I'm very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for an amazing speech and invite the first speaker of the Negating team to start their team's case.
I find it kind of ironic about how side affirming claims to care for these actual vulnerable people when they are actually in reality detrimenting them, actually rising the cost of living, rising the cost of things like grocery prices, and doing things that ultimately hurt and damage the lower socioeconomic spectrum of our country. Okay, so 3 points that I would make. Firstly, on some rebuttal. Secondly, on the significantly increasing the progressivity of the tax system detriments the economy and further hurts vulnerable actors in this debate. And thirdly, on how it actually discourages future business prospects. Okay, so firstly, on some rebuttal. I think what the affirming side fails to recognize in this debate is the fact that these companies and these people that they are actually taxing higher are not at the exact, they do not have the same means as spending as the average person, right? They have resources that they have to pay for. They have workers that they have to pay, and therefore that is why they need the money. That is why it is so important that is why it's so important that they actually receive profit so that they can pay their workers, so that they can pay off loans, things like that. The affirming side also claims that the government will be allocating resources. But however, I think when I'll further explain this in my speech, but I think the government has the responsibility to actually restore the way that the economy is currently is, and a responsibility to cater to businesses, especially when we're discouraging future people that are extremely, extremely helpful to our economy. Okay, so firstly on significantly how this detriments the economy. So what is the economy currently looking like? So we're currently actually in a recession, which is why it's so important that we actually get these people in the first place. Grocery prices are high. The cost of living is already high, right? But I'm going to explain to you why it is actually higher on their side of the house. Okay, so what are these companies and these very powerful actors that they're actually taxing higher? What do they look like in this debate? Well, they love money. They love money because they want to have money to further improve on their business, to innovate, to pay their workers, and they profit primarily off the poor. This is so important because when these people are taxed higher, it actively reflects on the poor. Because of two types of businesses. We have things like monopolies where they have things that people actually need, things like groceries, things like electricity, things like that. And then we have things that people want, which tend to be more retail stores and whatsoever. So what tends to happen in the pricing of the current status quo is that we have the cost of actually making these products. The cost of the cost of what it takes to actually have this thing and make this thing, and then they add it by the amount of profit that they want to make, and they tax it, right? So what changes on their side of the house? Well, when companies are significantly taxed higher amounts, they need to make up for the tax in profit. Okay, the reason for this is because, as I've stated over and over again, they need resources in order to make their business more innovative, in order to have better workers, in order to cover more expensive, which leads to what? How are they going to get this money? The obvious outcome is charging people more. Now, even if you don't believe that they'll do this, and they'll believe that these products will still be reasonably priced, when you're at when you're losing money as a company because you're not taxing people enough, workers of the company actively get paid less. There's less infrastructure in the actual business, less innovation, and that's terrible because then consumers get bad quality products. And then on the comparative, you're just charging people more. What are the outcomes of this point? Well, the outcomes of this looks like single mothers not being able to feed their children because the prices of living are so high. The prices of groceries are so high. Minimum wage workers trying to support their family, but they simply cannot because the companies are losing money. They have less money for paying the wages of workers. This looks like struggling students trying to pay their bills, trying to pay off their university fees, either by working these minimum wage jobs that will not pay them enough, and if they are paying them enough, it comes at a cost and an expense where they actually charge more for simply the right to live. Now that I have cleared out why this point weighs so heavily is because all of the claims that the affirmative side makes, we claim that it is actually worse on their side of the house, and we are able to prove this by proving you this point. I will take a point.
Do you not think that if you're taxed more but your groceries cost less, or you're taxed less and your groceries cost more, it kind of evens out to be the same?
No. Okay, so secondly, on how this discourages future business prospects. Okay, so why are future business prospects important in the first place? And why do we see a growth of them in the current status quo? This is so important because it shows how we're actually able to benefit the economy, like just in the status quo, and by completely disregarding this motion. Okay, well, in the current status quo, we actually see scholarships being handed out. We see encouragement in like the actual business workforce, better education on business in all aspects of our country, and this further encourages people to have new ideas, new innovation, and this is so good. So the reason why this is important is because, okay, in the current status quo, they already do pay higher tax to the government, which is already a benefit for all of the reasons that they say it is, but we're still able to claim it because it still gets allocated to healthcare and so forth. But also at the same time, like when we have new businesses and new ideas and more innovation, we have better quality products. We have more competition, which lowers down prices for consumers themselves. So what do people who actually tend to be future business prospects, like what do we look like? Well, we see that they're actually low income people because they're the people that tend to be actually problem solvers and solve problems in the world that that they want to profit off of, right? So they tend to be more low income, and so they have to actually save up their money because they tend to not be so privileged, right? So when these future business prospects, in order to start a business, have to invest money into their business, like not only will they probably not get paid as much because these minimum wage jobs are like not cutting it because these businesses are making less money, but they're also profit incentivized. So like I think it seems kind of like hopeless to them if no matter how much money they make, the more money they make, the more money they actually lose. So when they work so hard to get to the top, they work so hard to get these things, it just seems useless to them. So what happens when these very, very crucial actors fall out of the day? Well, the main outcome that we want to focus on here is the monopolization, which means that bigger companies are actually now able, rather than having a lot of different companies and competing to get lower prices, we now have monopolization, where companies are now able to actually fully utilize the country, higher the prices, higher the cost of living. Proud to negate.
Thank you, speaker, for an excellent speech, and I invite the second speaker of the Affirmative team to continue their own speech.
Hey, did you like that? Throughout this speech, they've continually told you how like small businesses like won't be encouraged to like start. They won't be like, there'll be less small businesses because of like inflation or something. But the reason for this is because like the reason we're going to get more businesses on our side is, as Jess has outlined in our model, we're decreasing the amount of tax we're charging like onto the small businesses, which means people are more incentivized to actually have a small business. So firstly then, on what happens to wealth inequality, and secondly on the impacts on the economies and companies and competition, which will be integrated with my split at the end. Okay. Firstly, on what happens with wealth inequality. Well, Jess has outlined really well to you how like there are going to be less welfare payments, and how we're going to allow for local businesses to survive by taxing them less. So it's like good for the economy and also for wealth inequality. Currently, like people with low paying jobs, they tend to be
still have a higher tax bracket than what we've provided, which means these people have a high disposable income. They're able to spend more time with family if they can work like maybe one less job. Instead of working 3, they can work 2, but get paid like a similar amount of money because we decreased the bracket by so much. And so the impacts that we've given you is that it's so like, we tell you that you need to weigh this so importantly in the debate because these are vulnerable people we're talking about, and it's also a large proportion of the population. Those scale and vulnerability are both high in this case. And also we tell you because of the gap of wealth decreases, but we feel like this hasn't been engaged so much on their side of the house, and they've failed quite a few times to actually engage with what our model has actually told you. And then we've also told you why this benefits everyone under the system. They're basically telling you how the government has this responsibility to cater to the businesses, but we've told you that they're going to cater to the taxpayers. They have the responsibility, if we're charging like those in higher income a greater amount of tax, they're going to feed into the wealth, healthcare services, the infrastructure services that these wealthy people also use along with those in low income. So we benefit those in low income as they're able to have more affordable and better healthcare services, and also for those in higher income where they can have the better infrastructure, the better piping systems for their businesses and their homes, and also just like how they're able to receive what their tax is giving in the end. Now, secondly, on the impacts it has on economies and companies, which they've told us how they brought up that quite continuously there's a cost of living crisis right now, and we agree to this, but I'm going to explain really explicitly to you in my split why this doesn't actually happen. They also brought up this example of like monopolies, but monopolies have the incentive to still have high prices on their side, so at worst case it's symmetric. These on our side, there's no like actual like competition either, and there's no competition on your side to the monopolies, so they're still going to be charging these really high prices. And then it's also possible that if companies that are providing the necessities are charging an excessive amount, the government will likely place a price ceiling on the corporation because of the overweighing experience and distrust between the government and people. So they're going to put this price ceiling on the monopolies, and we tell you that this idea of monopolies on both sides is likely symmetric, or even better on our side, due to the governments having more of an incentive to put a cap on the prices. Now, they also tell you how you need in the status quo, they give these future businesses scholarships. We tell you again that this is another quite niche example that also occurs on our side. They haven't explicitly outlined to you why it only occurs on their side, how they get these scholarships, so it's not mutually exclusive. And under our model, people are more incentivized to actually start a small business, because in the status quo, people feel like small businesses are still being taxed quite a high rate despite making little to no profit. But now we're increasing this profit marginally, or maybe even by a greater extent, because we've lowered the tax by 4% for these companies, or by 5%. Now, thirdly, then, I'll take a point now. Do small businesses want to stay small?
Well, small businesses, obviously, that to actually go get a business, you need to start from a small business, right? So people are more incentivized because of the lower tax bracket, because we've decreased it by 5%. And if they're able to make it to the bracket where they're making $175 of profit, which is a lot for a small business, it means that they're still going to be charged the same as the status quo, as Jess has outlined in our model, which means they are further incentivized, because not only are they starting off with a lower tax amount, so it's less of a risk for them to start a small business, but also later on the impact is the same when you get into the quite high the pretty average or high amount of profits you have. So now onto my extension on how there's this greater incentive of companies to sell goods at reasonable prices. And we feel like this engages a lot with a lot of their rebuttal, because they've told us how by increasing tax prices, there's going to be the companies are going to have to increase their prices with it. So we tell you that when individuals or companies are in the higher tax brackets, companies still have the incentive to keep up with competition. So if they raise their prices, they will have less consumers, as people simply can't afford it, which means they still have to have the certain amount of supply to sell. So this means that companies must not raise the costs by a lot. In our worst case, it will only increase by a tiny bit, but we tell you that other companies still exist and other products exist. So when they have these high prices, other companies are going to undercut them, and they're just going to not make any profit, and therefore it's a loss for the company. So they have no incentive to raise the price by very much. And we tell you that even if you believe that
the cost of living will increase, or like at least some certain products will like increase their prices a little greater. But however, we're still like these people are still paying less tax than normal. Majority of these people in the lower income brackets are paying less tax, so we feel like this weighs out, or they actually still get some benefit as in the amount of money they have, which means we've told you like they get more disposable income, they can spend more time with family, and this is so important for these people as they're being tired out by the economy and the need to just survive, which means it's so important for these people just to like just to be able to have the life they want by getting the necessities. And we give you this by lowering the tax bracket for low income people and having these greater services by taxing those in high income to a greater extent. So what are the impacts of this? It means that the high prices of the products are not likely to be as high as they're trying to portray, and we feel like this is quite it balances out, or in our best case, it actually weighs out as they're still getting higher like amounts of income due to the lower tax bracket. And it means that we're the side which benefits all the taxpayers. We told you how like Jess has told you, when you have all of these like this greater amount of tax revenue, the government has a greater budget to put into things like healthcare. And we see now that healthcare is a place where we need the money. We need the money to go to, and they will recognize that everyone is benefiting from this, and whether it's your low income, middle income, high income, or if like the workers of really big corporations, they still need these healthcare systems. They're going to recognize, and they won't feel so defeated by the government just because they have to pay like 6% more tax, because they're still benefiting it in the end. And we tell you that, like, currently now, there's this unfair amount of tax that low income people have to pay. It's not proportionate to the amount that high income people make, because often high income workers, they're not necessarily getting all the streams of income from their job. It could also be due to capital gains, which they're getting, and means they're not paying their actual fair share in comparison to those in low income. So it's actually not proportional in the status quo, which is why you must stand for side affirming.
I'd like to thank the speaker for one for speech and invite the second speaker of the Negating team to continue their
Let's go, Cadell.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh.
The affirmative team loses this debate when they mischaracterize actually how much these low-income people actually make. They talk about the low-income communities and say that because they're reducing the tax, all of a sudden these poor people who work these lower income jobs are all of a sudden going to have so much more income. The way they frame the amount of income that they're going to be getting is like some sort of magical amount that's going to somehow fix all their problems. Not acknowledging that these low-income people work low-income jobs, and secondly, not acknowledging the comparative, not acknowledging the linear increase that things have, trying to mitigate these, making them not seem as big as they actually are, and like we see in the status quo and in both worlds. Two things in this debate. Firstly, on the main clashes that have occurred, which is firstly, which side benefits low socio-economic communities, and secondly, which side benefits businesses more, and secondly on the split, which is that this mission negatively detriments poor people. Firstly on the clashes, which side benefits poor people more. What we've heard from affirming is this narrative that these poor people, because they're being taxed less, that their tax brackets are lower, all of a sudden they're going to have so much disposable income that they're going to be able to use to spend time with their families, to do all these things. They're going to be able to not work 3 jobs, but work 2 jobs now. They're going to have all this money because all of a sudden they're getting taxed less. Few responses to this. Firstly, what the affirmative team misses is that these people work normally low income jobs. already, and we see in status quo that they don't get paid much anyways. And to say just because you're removing some of the said tax, even at the rate that they're removing, the amount of money that they're gonna gain from said tax removal isn't substantial enough to actually have any impact on improving their lifestyle. We'll see that these people actually don't get any benefits from this tax increase. Yes, it might be even at their best, it might just be even a larger amount. They still won't be able to pay for a lot of stuff because the affirmative team misses the comparative that because they're raising taxes on the richer people, that these things are gonna go up. Like we see this in the status quo already The living crisis happens because people are getting paid more money, they're getting more tax, which means things comparatively have to move up. This is something the affirmative team misses and tries to mitigate and seem small, when in actuality it's not. They also talk about how they're gonna decrease the wealth gap between these people, because now they're gonna have more disposable income, and the richer people are gonna be getting taxed less. This is one of the biggest pushes from the affirmative team that we see. A few responses to this. Firstly, on the richer people getting taxed more. We see in the status quo already that a lot of big businessmen, CEOs and companies are able to find loopholes to get around paying tax. We see this as Nike having multiple companies to move their money around from different countries so they can pay less tax in countries that have lower tax brackets for them. We see this already. A lot of businessmen do dodgy things to miss tax paying already, which is why the wealth gap is so big already. Not just because of the tax brackets, but because obviously these businessmen are gonna want to make money. And even if you don't buy that, they're gonna don't buy that material on dodging their taxes. Obviously, they're gonna increase the prices of the stuff that they sell. Say, Countdown, for instance, owners of Countdown, when these low socioeconomic people, these poor people that they care so much about are getting more money, and they're getting paid, and they're getting taxed more money, obviously they're gonna increase it to even it out, as they so much love to talk about. So the benefit to low socioeconomic people, they don't actually get, because they miss the comparative. They try to play it down as if it's something that they that isn't as major as it actually is. It's a massive factor, and they don't acknowledge this to the extent that it actually is. And that those are the main pushes we hear from the affirmative team, and it simply just doesn't stand, because they miss a lot of stuff, a lot of that, and that is. Now done with that class, moving on to what side actually benefits businesses more. Well, again, what we hear from the affirmative team is that because they're lowering taxes on smaller businesses that make lower incomes, that these businesses are be more incentivized to all of a sudden try be more. They'll enjoy their lives a bit more because they're getting paid less tax. A few responses to this. We see that because of the nature of businesses are always growing. Businesses want to make more money. That's the incentive, making more money, because everyone loves to make a bit more money. You see, as these businesses grow, a lot of them, when they get to these higher tax brackets, say past the threshold of the low small business tax bracket, we see they're going to be actually, because of the way the model on the affirmative team works, they're going to be getting taxed more in actuality when they get up there. So they'll find all this hard work, all these things that happen on the lower end don't apply to them when they get to the high end, and they'll feel like they've been a bit cheated. They'll feel like it's unfair for them. So again, you start a cycle of people either trying to dodge their taxes, which is very bad, very illegal, or secondly, increasing the price of things, increasing the price of the items and goods and services that they sell, which in turn negatively affects all the poor people that the affirmative team tries so desperately to help, which means overall a lot of the benefits that the affirmative team stands for don't stand, because the affirmative team lives in this dream world where everything is idealistic, that a lot of the margins of pay and all these different things aren't as big as they actually are. They need to wake up to reality and see all the trees that aren't green, they're yellow. Okay, moving on to my split. But before I do, I'll take a POA. I'll take a point.
How are these tax frauds and loopholes reduced in any way on your side?
what we see because of the nature of the tax brackets on our side, they're not paying as much tax as they would be on your side. So they're less incentivized to actually be trying to cheat the tax system, cheat the law, because the law isn't harming them as much as they would be on your side of the house. We actually see on their side of the house, they're actually more incentivized because they're getting paid more tax. And obviously, I'm a rich businessman. I do not want to pay my taxes. Now my taxes are larger. I'm gonna just woo and go away and dodge them in another country on the other side of the world. This is a very odd thing. And moving on to my split, that this actually negatively detriments poorer people. Context. We see in the status quo that these people that live in these low socioeconomic areas, that work these low income jobs, are the ones that get hit hardest by the living crisis, all these different things, because obviously they don't get paid enough money, and all this stuff is actually making more money. So what do we see this? We see that on the affirmative side of the house, they live in this world where, because they're getting paid less tax, all of a sudden they're going to have this exponential bigger amount of money to actually improve their cost of living, and they're going to take all this other tax from these other places to actually help them. This simply doesn't work, because we see, again, it's a linear increase. If something goes up, another thing must go up to meet that, and it actually gets more detrimental on their side of the house, because, as I stated, they're making rich people pay more tax. Where are the rich people going to get the money so they can make more money, because they love money? They're going to take it out from their businesses, increase the wages of their businesses. These low-income workers, we see notoriously that these low socioeconomic workers, they work like labor-intensive jobs, very low-skill jobs. And who owns these jobs? These rich businessmen. So what's most likely to happen is they're going to get paid less, so that these businesses don't have to pay as much, so they can actually find more ways to cheat the poor people that the affirmative team so loves, which means they actually don't get the benefits they talk about. They actually get worse harms for poor people on their side of the house. This is why you should stand with side negating. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for an excellent speech and invite the third speaker of the affirming team to close out the substantive portion of their team's case.
Go, Daniel.
Okay, Daniel. Now you have to say it.
Shut down.
Oh, you got this back.
Oh. Yeah.
Oh, there's a. Do you want your phone back as well?
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. If I'm a poor person with 5 sticky notes, and in the status quo, I have to pay with 4 sticky notes, I have 1 sticky note left. But under our model, if I only just pay back 3 sticky notes, I have 2 sticky notes. That means I have more sticky notes now than I did in the status quo. This is what we stand for on this side of the house. We are the side which protects the poor people. We are the side that increases the benefits for the vulnerable people. And we are the side which don't harm businesses as much as Negating wants you to prove. 2 questions for the house today. 1, what is the effect of the progressive wealth, of this increase in progressivity, or progression of tax system for people in low socioeconomic backgrounds? And secondly, what is the effect on businesses? And under this will be this thing about monopolies and corporations, which they want to talk about. Firstly, then, on how we benefit the poor people on our side. Look, Jess and Katie give you all these reasons as to why we decrease wealth inequality. Under our model, we've told you why we decrease the tax rate for poorer people, right? At their best case, they try to say that we're gonna have marginal benefit. They try to tell us that we only have marginal benefits. But if I'm a poor person who's struggling to live in the world, a marginal benefit is better than no benefit at all, right? If I'm struggling to pay my bills on a week-by-week basis, but now I'm getting less tax on my income, less tax on my money, and now I can pay those bills comfortably, that's one massive stress taken away, right? That improves my mental health on my side, because now I'm less stressed about paying my bills.
why?
It means I could spend more time with my family, and I could probably set aside savings or money to spend on luxuries in the long run, right? Because we're getting less tax. And then medium income people aren't going to be as harmed as they try to tell you to believe, because they see the benefits which the government has for redistributing the increase in tax revenue which we got on our side, right? Just as characterized to you what this increase in wealth distribution looks like, and tax revenue distribution looks like, right? It looks like better healthcare. It looks like better infrastructure. It looks like better education. This benefits all the people in our population because these are sectors which benefit all the people because everyone uses these sectors, right? So this is a large increase in this benefit, and we don't hear any benefits from their side, right? Under the status quo, the poor people are being taxed at a significant rate. Under our side, we get taxed less. So therefore, we benefit on our side, right? And then the main pushback at second is they try to say that this increase is not substantial, this decrease in tax is not substantial enough. But as I've told you already, right? It doesn't matter how substantial it is. Firstly, proportionally, because you're at a low income job, this proportional increase in income is probably more better for you than the proportional decrease you have for rich people, right? Because these poor people don't have necessarily the means in the status quo to pay their bills on a week-by-week basis. They're probably in state housing or in low-quality housing, right? Which means on our side, because you have this increase in your income, you can pay this. So yes, you do get a substantial increase, but secondly, even if we don't get a substantial increase, as said earlier, the marginal benefit we get is always going to be better, and because we've told you these are the vulnerable people in this debate, we win this point, and that alone wins this debate. But secondly then, on businesses, right? Personally, I'm engaged with the material on monopolies. They try to tell us, oh, monopolies are going to have, they're probably going to increase prices on our side now because we're increasing the taxes on their side. Firstly, Katie's already told you how governments can react by putting a price ceiling, right? Price ceilings are implemented to protect the consumers because like what they try to tell you is that a lot of monopolies probably work in in sectors that have like necessities like groceries, for example. They're not going to increase prices for bread to be like $20, right? Because this is going to harm a lot of consumers. What is the government going to see? They're going to see that this bread's probably put at $20, but they understand a lot of people want bread, right? So what are they going to do? The government's going to put a price ceiling and put bread at something like $8 or $12 or whatever the value of bread is in that context. What does this mean? It means you actually don't get the harm of paying a significant increase in groceries because of the price ceiling, which means monopoly power doesn't actually increase. Secondly, because we get the added benefit on our side of hitting less income for our tax on lower socioeconomic people, which means they could have an even greater means to afford these groceries and afford these necessities, right? But secondly, the monopoly incentive to have high profits exists on both sides, regardless of whether you get taxed more or not, right? So at worst case for us, this is a metric in the debate because both sides have in both scenarios, monopolies have this incentive to always increase profit, to always increase prices. So therefore it's not a unique harm on our side, right? Now moving on aside from monopolies, moving on now to how they talk about like increased prices for corporation, and they also talk about small businesses, right? But before I talk about small businesses, I'll take a point now.
What is the point in people being able to pay their bills if the bills are higher?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What is the point in lower socioeconomic people being able to pay their bills if the bills are higher?
Why would their bills be higher in the first place? Because they're getting less, because in our world, they're getting taxed less, right? Because they're getting less tax on their income, they're more able to increase their bills. Also, we don't see how bills increase in the first place. So anyways, moving on now to small businesses, right? They try to tell you, the main pushback we actually hear of this isn't a POI when they say, small businesses want to stay small. A few responses to this. Firstly, in a lot of situations, small businesses are probably your local businesses in your town, in your small communities, right? These people probably want to just stay local, want to stay simple, because they're probably run by people who love their local community, who love their small business, who love their customers, and focus on that, right? But secondly, even if they want to increase, right, increasing to become a large corporation is really difficult, which means it's going to take a long time, right? So at the time in which they do qualify for the next bracket of tax, they have the means in this scenario to pay that tax in the first place. They have the means to pay this higher burden of tax. So you're either going to get small businesses getting less tax, as we've told you, which benefits them because of the profit incentive they told us, or they're going to have the means to pay the higher tax, when they progress to higher tax brackets. Right? So that's why we also benefit small businesses, which are typically in these local communities, right? So this is why it benefits to our side. So at the end of this, what do we see? We see that we are the ones who benefit businesses, and we are the ones who benefit low SES people. I also just want to work with material now on Katie's split about... Okay, before I do that, so Shad tells some businesses about how like people are going to work really labor-intensive jobs, which probably have like poor physical conditions, right? That's what they try to tell us at second. Firstly, Jess has told you why you're probably going to have less. You probably don't have to work like three jobs anymore. You're probably working 1 or 2, right? Which means you're working one less labor-intensive job, which is better for your physical health, and it also means you're also probably spending more time with your family, which means you're probably going to which also means you're spending less time at work and more time with your family. So you don't actually see this harm in getting this physical harm in getting all these jobs and working in all these jobs, right? Because you're spending less time on these jobs, you're spending less time actually receiving the harm of physical harm. So then, to quickly whip in Katie's split. Because of the competition mix that we provide you in Jess and Katie, this means that prices on their side probably won't increase that much, right? But even if it does increase, because of the lower taxes, because of the decrease in tax that we see on our side for low socioeconomic people, they have the greater means to afford this. What do we see at the end of this? We're the ones who benefit the low SES people. We're the ones who don't harm businesses. I'm very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for a wonderful speech and invite the third speaker of the Negating team to close out the substantive portion of their team's case.
Ooh. Three things I want to do for you today in today's debate. First, prove that the cost of living is increased on their side, or at least symmetric. Second, that employees actually are low socioeconomic employees are actually negatively affected by passing this mission. And third, that the wealth gap wouldn't be able to decrease as the opposing team would like to believe. First of all, I'd like to go into the first point. Is the cost of living decreased by passing this mission? What we have told you is that companies that are taxed more, these big companies like the warehouse, the McDonald's, who they generally hire more? They hire people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, right? And what is the effect of putting tax on them? What happens is that they will decrease the pay of employees to match this tax. This is a business. They operate to find as much money as possible, as we have both agreed to. So these employees will decrease the pay of employees, and that will it most likely would remain symmetric of the cost of living in this scenario, because of the fact that they may be able to say that they didn't have to pay as much taxes, but they will also be paid less by passing this mission because of that. Another push they did by saying decrease the cost of living is that people can work singular jobs. But as my team has stated, that these people who are struggling, even in the middle class, fail to reach the cost of living standards, and people in the lower class, even in the status quo, are detrimented by this effect. And as I proved to you before, that the tax and the tax rate being decreased and the cost of living being increased, it just remains symmetric, and that's what happens, and poor people are still detrimented on both sides. But what happens is that instead of paying their taxes to the government, which will increase their healthcare, etc., they will instead be paying their money to these lifeless brands to increase their money. So the benefit of where these low socioeconomic people's money goes to is more beneficial on our side rather than their side, as this amount of money goes to these mindless corporations.
Point.
Yes.
If costs are all symmetric, then aren't we the side that actually
No,
benefits?
due to the reason that I stated that it's more beneficial on our side, as the money that is going to the money that these low socioeconomic people are going to in tax is actually going to the government, which will benefit them in the long run, instead of a lifeless company. That is why it's more beneficial on our side. And they also stated that people will be more incentivized to get jobs because of lower tax. But that is quite unrealistic. When do people say, "Oh, I can't wait to get this job because the tax is lower"? That's completely unrealistic. And most of these jobs and most of these jobs are low-paying jobs in the demographic that are most affected. So, and the real reason because of why people are failing to get jobs, etc., is because people are naturally lazy. And if money was as big of an incentive as it is, as they claim, then jobs will be everywhere. People will be scrambling for jobs. But in reality, people are lazy in general. They try to. Yes.
If I'm a poor person, I don't want all the money I want, and if I see the job has lower taxes, which means I get more money than the benefit, wouldn't I want to go to that?
You assume that because in the status quo I get more money, so that means I can pay for more things. But what if more things is more expensive? So then that just negates that whole argument in the first place. So, is the cost of living in this first point of clash? Is the cost of living decreased by this mission? In the best case, it's symmetric. In our best case, we benefit by paying these taxes, these low socioeconomic people's taxes, to the government, which will then benefit the people that pay the taxpayers. The taxpayers themselves will benefit from paying this tax to the government. Next, do employees benefit from this tax breaks? As I touched on before in my first point of clash, is that these companies will generally are seeking to make money profit as much as possible. So employees are negatively affected much more on their side as the pay will increase. These are lifeless, and the demographic, as I said before, are the people in low socioeconomic people. But what I'm trying to say is that generally throughout the whole argument is that the people who are harmed the most in all scenarios and benefit more on our side is the low socioeconomic peoples. And yes.
Do you not have a cost of living crisis on your side as well, and so therefore the harms are symmetric?
Yeah, but you're not fixing it. And as I stated, it's more beneficial on our side, as your money that you're paying goes to your healthcare. They try to make the argument that the funds that the government receives from tax will be increased. But as I stated before, who are the majority of the people? Like the 99% of people are middle, lower class. And when you cut their tax, you're also removing a huge amount of funds that the government would have gained, and trying to subsidize this by using a few singular people and using their tax, raising the tax by like 10%, which won't match the amount of people that are affected. In order for your point to work, you will need to increase the tax by a lot to match the rest of the population, especially, yeah. Say what happens is in the status quo that these. And I like to acknowledge something. In the status quo, these rich people already pay millions in taxes. These guys already pay millions in taxes. And what you're doing, you're taking what the opposing team is doing. They're taking the heart from these people's low demographic and then putting another heart into the rich people. Because in this, rich people are the only ones that benefit, as they have loopholes. They can go through other outlets. They exploit the poor for money. By doing this, you're making the rich people exploitive of people more. So the only people that are negatively affected by passing this motion is the low socioeconomic demographic, as the rich people have loopholes around it. As you know, they won't gain as much taxes that you would like to think they would, due to the fact that there's loopholes, there's tax frauds, etc. So in fact, employees
employees don't benefit as much as the other team would like to believe, and what we have done for you today is that prove that rich people will not suffer by passing this motion, but the people that will suffer the most on their side is the lowest of the classes in this demographic. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for a wonderful speech and invite the leader of the Negating team to exercise the right of reply.
I think side affirming pushes so hard down on the fact that the current status quo is so bad with the cost of living crisis and all of these other things, right? So I think what we need to prove in this debate, and the metric that I think that it should be judged on, is who actually makes those problems worse. Okay, so 2 points I want to touch on. Okay, firstly, who actually proves that the cost of living will increase on which side? And secondly, on the motivation of future entrepreneurs. Firstly, on the cost of living. Okay, so why is this an important point in the debate, and why does this weigh so heavily? I think this is because both sides have mutually agreed on the fact that the lower income class is a very important stakeholder in this debate, right? So what do we hear from side affirmative? We hear that people are able to pay their bills, and people have greater means to pay their bills because of lower tax and because of things like equality, like wealth inequality and stuff. However, I think the thing that they fail to take into account is the fact that companies and the average low class person, the lower socioeconomic community, they spend their money on different resources. We explained to you very clearly at first AFF what these resources are and how they actually benefit consumers, right? We explained to you very clearly down the line at first AFF about how when you increase the amount of money that you're charging these bigger companies, it has three main outcomes that we push very hard on. So we talk about how it needs to weigh out. They still need to make profit so that they can have these resources, so that they can build on this infrastructure that actually benefits consumers. We don't really hear a lot about that on side affirming. So I think it's a point that also weighs very heavily in the debate. And secondly, about loopholes, I think this isn't very clearly dealt with on side affirming, just because these loopholes are very much I think we explained it to you very clearly. And then thirdly, we explained to you how the lower income, we explained to you very clearly, and I think the point that this debate should weigh very heavily on is the fact that simply when you increase the amount that these companies are given, they need to make up for it in manufacturing. They need to make up for it in infrastructure, which therefore benefits consumers. When they have to make the prices of their stuff higher, which therefore reflects on consumers, and I think that's a very important point that we need to consider in this debate. Okay, so secondly, on the motivation of future entrepreneurs, another point that weighs heavily in this debate, because we both acknowledge the importance of these future entrepreneurs, right? So what do we hear from side affirming? So we talk a lot about monopolizations, and they basically say that they're not going to let these bigger monopolies increase the prices because the government decreases the prices. But I think they completely disregard what a monopoly actually is and how they're actually able to control the government because they own everything, because they control the price of living, because they control whether people can get food or not. There was an issue that pressed so heavily on the affirming team is that people have time for their family and people are able to put shoes on their children. However, I think that this is absolutely pointless if they have no shoes in the first place because shoes are too expensive. I think this is really important now because I think I've proved to you why we won. Because one, we've proved why we therefore benefit lower socioeconomic communities and we detriment lower socioeconomic communities on their side of the house. We then prove like how the motivation of future entrepreneurs then decrease on their side of the house because of things like higher tax brackets and so forth. Therefore, this is why we have won this debate. Proud to negate.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech, and I invite the leader of the Affirmative team to close today's debate.
Would you just like back to yourself?
Didn't even think about it.
That's just in a spirit.
We told you from the get-go that the most important people in today's debate is the low socioeconomic people. We are the side of the house that is able to provide a benefit to them, but we are also the side of the house that is able to provide a benefit to everyone else who is incurring these tax policies. 2 points for the house today. Firstly, how we positively impact lower-income individuals, and secondly, how we positively impact businesses. Firstly then, on the impact on low-income individuals. In order for opposition to win, they had to prove that businesses will increase costs of goods by so much that it overrides the tax decrease. In our worst case, we are able to make this harm symmetric because there is an increase in income, therefore they will be able to keep up with the increase of costs. And this is true because Katie explained to you that monopolies are unable to lock out the majority of consumers because that negatively impacts the company when consumption decreases substantially. Where we gain an advantage, though, is through the fact that these people now have more autonomy in their ability to make money and the ability to provide for their family. This is a really important benefit because these low SES individuals are made to feel vulnerable when they are unable to allow their child to go to school with a full tummy because they are reliant on the government benefits and they just don't have enough of that money to make sure that this happens. However, the more likely scenario is that prices don't increase substantially because of competition. This competition increases when taxes decrease on local businesses, which means that, as Katie has explained, it therefore allows these local businesses to continue to survive. So we actually don't only have a monopolistic society, but it's likely that you have local businesses who offer that competition as well, and these local businesses want to provide for their local people at an affordable cost because firstly, their ability to survive is contingent on their ability to make money, but secondly, these local people are people that we know. I told you from first that people like local businesses because they like supporting locally. You can see the impact that it has on people in your community. But the last thing here is, even if you don't believe that the cost of goods won't decrease, then what we told you is that governments are likely to implement price ceilings, which ensures that companies cannot charge egregious prices, because otherwise it creates a negative relationship between the government and the constituents when they are all suffering and cannot afford to buy groceries. But the last thing that I want to note on this point is that because government revenue has increased, because the tax on the rich people means that, because of the tax on the rich people, it means that you get an increase in welfare policies, which means that you get better hospitals, better infrastructure, better roading, and this all goes to directly benefit those low SES people as well as everyone else. And the reason that that tax is enough is because cumulatively, the tax on the low SES people will never equate to the income, to the increase in taxes on these richer people. I gave you all of this material at first when I flagged to you that the harms to the rich people will never outweigh the harms to the poorer people. Secondly then, on businesses. We are the side that allows for smaller businesses to thrive. Because you are getting taxed less, it makes it far more accessible for you to create a local business and to stay afloat because you garner local support. But Daniel also explicitly explained that these small businesses probably doesn't want to get that much bigger because of the fact that, first of all, they like to be local. That's really easy. Secondly, it's really difficult to get bigger. But lastly, if they do want to get bigger, it means that it's actually more accessible on our side because you've now had less tax. You've been able to create that profit. You're then able to put that profit into expanding your business and then being able to incur the bigger taxes. But I think the last thing here is on large corporation owners. And in order for this harm to win them the debate, it had to be an exclusive harm which does not occur on their side of the house. Because of the fact that tax fraud exists on their side, it isn't exclusive, therefore the same flaws that they are trying to push on our case, they need to push on theirs. But the second thing to note is that tax fraud is illegal, right? And so therefore the amount of people who are probably going to engage in this is really slim, because you have to be really desperate to go, I don't want to pay my taxes, I'd rather go to jail for a really long time. We think that people are logical and probably aren't going to make this trade-off. This is why I'm very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and thank both teams for an excellent debate. I invite you to cross the floor and shake hands, and if everyone could exit the room to be adjudicated.
Oh my god.
Good job. Oh my gosh, come here. That was amazing. Good job, Cadell. Amazing job.
Good job. Good job. Good job.
I have no sticky notes.
No sticky